All right, hey folks. As promised, we're trying to do devlogs more frequently now. I'm going to try and do one every week or so. And we're also going to start doing some on theme as well. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, for this one, we're going to talk about something that we did for our teaser that just got released. With me is our 3D artist who handles pretty much everything from environmental props to weapons. This is Javi. He's pretty much the go-to guy and has been toiling over all of the stuff that we have to do for Mara. And especially trying to get it to work with our cell shading and everything. Javi's been doing 3D art for how long now?
Pretty much 2 years. I will say 2 years.
Yeah. He also has an art station that I'll link down below if you guys want to go check it out. He'll probably have some good stuff there, and I think planning on adding some more stuff soon. So something to keep an eye out for. But yeah, let's get to it. So I'm going to go over sort of what we did in Unreal for the actual cinematic a little bit first. So let's go to our... we have a specific scene that we've built out that replicates what the game is using, but we can kind of modify for cinematic use. There we go. All right, and you see a random horse. Okay, so gonna go ahead and show you this in lit mode. So this is what the music box looks like. Turn off game mode. Overall, the idea is that we wanted to have sort of this like old style music box that a kid would have, you know, like early 90s kind of thing. But the goal is that we wanted it to sort of represent something that the demon in the game uses to like sort of like torment you, and even like has some sort of like possession over it type thing. So overall, we came up with like an old style music box design, crank up handle and everything, a little like key to lock it, stuff like that. And then we went ahead and modeled the ballerina for it, which was very interesting because none of us know like any actual like 3D character modeling specifically. So it was just a combination of myself, Javi, and Alex, who's our other 3D modeler, trying to sort of get it to happen and look decent and everything. I'm just gonna quickly switch over to our level sequence. So all our cinematics are built into level sequences that we then used to play and render out for the actual like teaser, trailer, etc. So throughout the gonna quickly turn off the audio. Throughout the cinematic, you'll see the music box sort of spinning like this. I can actually show you what it looks like from the beginning, and ignore the weirdness. So, hold on. Level sequences like to be a little bit special sometimes. Okay, there we go. So it will spin like this, and there will be music playing in the background. But the special thing that we wanted to do for the teaser is we wanted it to start changing and getting more like demonic and creepy. So we actually made a second set of textures that we then sort of linearly interpolate to that turns into this sort of like demonic version. So you can see here, the music box gets all sort of like scratched up and dirty, and the ballerina gets all bloody and starts bleeding from the eyes. These are actually like two completely different sets of textures that we linear interpolate to, and then also add the VFX on top of. But the reason why you can kind of see it getting like scratched up and dirty in a way where it looks like it's sort of wearing and tearing is just the style of the textures. So as you can see, like if I get a little bit closer, there's like specific spots that are darker and more dirty than others. So that gives the effect that it's sort of like slowly getting like dirty and old versus something that would be more noisy where you would kind of just see it overall change. The goal was to try and make it look like it's aging over time. And I think that handled pretty well with the way that we did our textures. And yeah, that's pretty much what we did in the engine. I think it turned out pretty great, and you can go and see more in the actual teaser to see how it turned out. But I'm going to pass it over to Javi so that he can kind of show you guys what we did in Substance and in Blender in order to be able to get that look, as well as some trouble that we ran into and how we fixed it and stuff like that. So let me just switch over to Javi's screen, and yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so one of the first thing that is important to keep in mind whenever you're making anything is always having in preferences. Like it can be anything around you, it can be an image of what you want to make, right? So in this case, we wanted to make a music box with a ballerina. So we have to go, through the internet, gathering a lot of pictures on different sites, different type of models. So at the end, we come up with something for what we want, right? So as you can see here, you see my screen, right? Just to make sure.
Yeah, it's all good to go.
So this is the final model of the music box. This doesn't have the materials are turned off, but this is just to show the basic topology, right? So, to make a music box is pretty easy, straightforward. We always have to play with like basic shapes, right? So you can see this is just basically a rectangle here, square here, cylinders here and there. It really matters, like it really depends, what you want to make. You have to just understand basics of geometries and proportions. So one of the main difficulties of the music box, in my experience, because I'm not really a 3D character artist, is making the actual ballerina, right? Because it requires a lot of knowledge in anatomy, proportions, the basics, right? So with the help of the other 3D artists, we could make something kind of decent, I would say, and just fix more going into the technical issues to make it look good in the render time. Things like I'm gonna go a bit more technical, so like end guns, things like, because in 3D when you make something, you always need to make sure that the topology, this is the topology basically, it always have to be either triangles or squares. Anything that goes beyond that, it's called end guns. End guns are kind of the enemies of the textures, because whenever a model has end guns, it's going to be really hard to texture it. After we have done the basic shape and everything, then we go straight into detail. So if you can see here, this is pretty much a mix of different shapes all put together. This is not a single shape, and just to find a way to like make it look decent, to make sense. And yeah, as I was saying, one of the things that we need to take care is not having any end guns. You can see that pretty much everything that it's here, it has like 4 sides. Because this is a cylinder, like a circular shape, it's impossible to have squares. So sometimes it's good to have just triangles. It really depends on how you texture your model, right? So yeah, that's pretty much the basics of modeling. And once everything is well made, we got into the second part, which would be the unwrapping. Unwrapping, I don't know if you can see my left side, the right side of my screen. It's pretty much the model put into a 2D plane, because this is where you're gonna actually paint on it. You need to do the unwrapping, which means you take the skin of the object and you paste it on a 2D plane so you can paint. So because this is a model with 2 parts, what I did was just separating the main music box and the main ballerina, because the higher the space you have, the better the texturing is, because it all comes into the resolution textures. If I decided to put everything together, which would be, I guess, optimized, but at the same time, the resolution of the materials and texture would have been really small, and that would make things look pixelated. So in order to avoid that, I try to just make 2 different materials for each object. Once everything is done, I forgot to mention that, well, I cannot show it here because it's quite heavy for the PC to run many softwares, 3D software, but once you have the low poly model, yeah, this is a low poly model. You need to import this into a sculpting software. It could be even Blender has its own its own sculpting mode, but you can also use ZBrush to sculpt the details at the high poly of the model, because you need to do baking. Baking is pretty much making a high poly model and projecting the details of the high poly model to your low poly model, because what we don't want in a game engine is to have high poly model. This is not good for rendering, for performance, for memory. So once everything is done, we can go to our software called Substance Painter. In this part, we basically just make sure that everything looks exactly like in the 3D modeling software. We try to make sure that everything was imported correctly. And I guess in this part is where your creativity comes up, because this is where you need to find how you want the textures and the materials to look like. This is also important because you need to look for real-time, like real-world materials. Let's say, for example, we wanted this music box to be wooden, right? So we need to find all what we could of references of wood in the furnitures or like in boxes. Oh, it's hard to say. Sorry. So yeah. So I can give you a really quick run through. What I did here was pretty much deciding which part of the music box will have which material. So a music box, if you go onto the internet, or if you have one, you can see that a music box have wood. It could have some metal parts. It could have some aluminum, whatever, right? So what we do here is just, this is pretty much like what can I use to compare, like Photoshop using layers. So each layer represents a material. So let's say I wanted to make this thing wooden. I already made it. I was just hiding the materials. So this will be the final texture, the final material for the wood. You can see that I missed some really tiny piece here that it can be fixed just by using mask. Pretty much this is always done using mask. Is if people know how to use Photoshop, they can get like a really good idea of what I'm talking about. If not, then masks are basically hiding the color and just using white, darks and whites, right? So white is like what you want to be visible, and dark is what you don't want to see.
Yeah, like a good way of putting it for anyone who's not too familiar with this kind of stuff, where you're just starting to get into creating textures. The idea behind a mask is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You're covering the things you don't want to be seen. So in one layer, let's say you want to have, I don't know, some like more dirty looking things. So you're adding like some dark spots. What you can do on the mask is you can set it up so that you have like whatever texture you want to use, and then you apply the mask, and then you use the brush to highlight the spots that you want to actually show up. And if you look on the mask, you'll see that everything is black, and then the spots that you painted that to show up are white. And that basically just tells the software, hey, these are the spots you actually want to be visible. And then you can also choose things like the opacity, and then, you know, adjust whatever else you want in terms of like blending and stuff like that.
Yeah, pretty much. I just uncover all the materials that I use for the music box. As you can see, this will be like the final result that we decide to use. And for the ballerina, as you can see, I don't know if you can see that there are like different tabs on the texture set list, because each tabs represent a material. So what I mentioned before is that for every material that you have, you also have the UV layers, which is the 2D plane where you put where you pretty much skin the model. So it represents the same thing. So if I click on the ballerina, it's going to take me to the ballerina UVs. So this is pretty much the way I underwrapped the ballerina. Again, I'm not a 3D character artist, so I try to do my best. Try to use as much space as possible to have the best resolution. So for this, it's pretty much the same principle. The ballerina, it's a human. Well, it's a body. So you have to decide color of the skin, the color of the clothing, the color of the hair, the color of whatever accessory the ballerina or the mesh is gonna have. It's all using references. You always need to have references. If you have two monitors, like on the same monitor, you always need to have a tab showing everything, pretty much everything you need to, because this is really important for a 3D artist of pretty much whatever you need to make. You always need to use references.
Yeah, if you're working with Blender, for example, they actually have a really neat tool in Blender that allows you to import images that you want to use as references and sort of have them in the 3D space. And then you can sort of pan over to them as you're modeling or texturing to be able to look at the references at the same time, instead of having to have other things like a browser open with your references or whatever. But yeah, it's just something that might come in handy if you're using Blender.
For the ballerina, as I was mentioning, that we needed to decide what color to use. The first thing I had here would be let's see, I already forgot what was this. Okay, so you can see that it kind of shows a really tiny square with colors. This is pretty much the layer and the color that I decided to use. I tried to name it accordingly. So if I want to go, for example, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, this is not really that noticeable if you look it from far away, but if you get closer, these are the maps, the normal maps that you get when you pretty much bake the high poly mesh on the low poly mesh. You can do that in Substance Painter. It pretty much throws you different maps. I don't know, I'm going technical here. The normal maps, the normals is pretty much how the light reacts to, when the light hits a surface, and how the light spreads and makes shadows. That also you can also make ambient occlusion, which would be the shadowing of the mesh itself. It can also give you curvature. It can also give you it can give you a set of normal maps that you use. This is to make the mesh look more realistic. This was a really optional thing, because once you bake the high poly on the low poly, you're already getting the details on the mesh. But if you want to enhance the details, you can add them on the mesh to make it, to give, I don't know, more shadowy, more details, right? So yeah, moving on, I tried to make a hair for the model, because this ballerina is made of wood. I tried not to make it look like a real human, but something that was like a piece of wood carved to give the shape of a ballerina. So I tried to make everything look like not as realistic as a human ballerina, but more like a toy. Yeah, so we decided to go brown for the hair. Here, we decided that the ballerina was gonna wear purple leggings. It can get really messy when you're trying to apply different textures and materials to mesh. You need to remember what you do. It looks bad because this is just a piece of material that I use for the ballerina. But as I keep adding more stuff, it's gonna get more and more details. So just to make it really short, okay, no, not this one. To make it really short, you try to find a way to make it look like wood, but at the same time to also look like a bit like a human, with trying to imitate human skin. on the wood. So yeah, this will be the skin color of the ballerina. And what else can I show here? I'm trying to look for the clothing. If I go to cloth at the very end. So yeah, I just turn it on. The materials, as you can see, they look.
Do you want to get a little bit closer just so I can see the detailing?
Yeah,
That's good.
so usually when you use just one material, it's incomplete. So as I keep turning on the materials that I use, is giving it the color that we wanted. So for example, I tried to name, like, I wanted to make the clothing bluish. I add some variation. Doesn't really look that clear. It's like a tiny, like a slight difference that not many people can see. Then you have to try to add like dirt. Well, it's really hard to see, but if I go into my UV, there's something going on here. This is like the back of the model. I try to add like dirt, like shadowing, and I have another one called dust, which would be pretty much the details on the ballerina's clothes. Now keep in mind this is all wood, so I try to make it look like wood, not like clothing. So just to give it a really quick, this is pretty much everything that was made. And I also had to make a variation for the blood. As in the trailer, the camera gets closer to the ballerina, it changes color. So I try to imitate how, blood looks on the wood. And this will be the remaining details of the ballerina. It looks really creepy. This is the intended design we wanted.
Yeah, and like it was a challenge for us too, because we needed to think about how we could like represent these details and get that creepy factor. But since the camera is still going to be sort of at a distance and it's going to be panning in, we needed to think about how we can make it less noisy, but still represent those details to make it so you understand, the material that it's made out of, the creepy factor, the blood, and have it really blend nicely at a distance, so it didn't look like you were looking at too much at once. But I think the end result came up pretty well. After a lot of toiling and revisions, we finally got to a pretty good result. How did you want to do that?
I was gonna say just pretty happy with the end result. One of the main difficulties we had was to make the model look exactly the same in the game engine, because something that light can affect a lot how the final result can look like. So yeah, this was another technical issue we had. We tried to find the best way to make it look exactly the same as it looks here. So yeah,
that is a pretty good point too. Yeah, and adjusting the lighting further so that we can keep the detailing that we wanted to keep. And it is a dark scene, and we have the cell shading on top of that, so there was a lot of weirdness we had to deal with. But ultimately we did manage to resolve them, and we used some of the solutions that we mentioned before to achieve that look. Yeah, but that's pretty much everything that we wanted to go over today. Hope you guys found some stuff that might help you out in the future, as well as got to see what kind of stuff we've been working on and what kind of stuff's to come in the future. As a reminder, make sure to go check out that teaser. You'll be able to see the music box in full-fledged lighting and the whole sort of teaser for Schwarzwald and everything like that. I'll also include the link down below to Wishlist Schwarzwald on Steam, which is now up. The trailer is also up on the Steam page if you prefer to go watch it there. Hope to see you guys soon, and we'll try and make this a weekly thing, so keep an eye out. All right, have a good one, guys. Take care.